Cool. So I think we can get started. So hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to today's panel, Beyond Digital Wellbeing, How Responsible Human-Centered Business Models Can Create the Digital World We Want to See. My name is Akul Bali. I'll be the moderator for this panel. I'm the co-founder of Privy, a new human-centric social media platform with no ads or tracking that we're developing to solve many of the issues we see created by the social media giants of today. So we'll start off by discussing the current state of non-human centric business models, just to set the stage and the issues they've created, and then dive into what a human-centric future could look like. As with all the other sessions, you can ask questions via the Q&A section on Huba, and we'll get to as many audience questions as we can during the Q&A portion in the back half of the panel. And as always, please use respectful language, and we hope you enjoy the panel. So with that, before we dive into the questions, I'll have the panelists all introduce themselves and give you a brief overview of their background and interest in today's topic. So to kick things off, Matt, let's start with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cool. And welcome everyone to the webinar. Super excited for all of you guys to join us and really excited to just have a great conversation. But to introduce myself, my name is Matthew. I am a sophomore at UC Berkeley's MET program, which is the Management Entrepreneurship Technology program, double majoring in electrical engineering, computer science, and business administration. Reason why I'm here today is because in high school, mental health was something that was extremely huge for me personally. Especially with living in the Bay Area, there are just so many stressors around us, and in general, the student body was very stressed out. And you really saw the toll that social media had on students, but also the overall kind of culture that's being brought around high school students as well. And seeing that kind of visually, and also seeing that with happening in my friend groups. In fact, one of my friends taking their own lives. It really led me to want to make a difference, and it led me to creating this organization called Elephant in the Room, which is an opportunity and platform for students to just speak out about their problems and just bring a connected group of people to kind of promote open-mindedness. And so, yeah, that's about me. Pass it off to John.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everyone. I'm John. I'm a recent graduate of St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, where I study psychology. And I've been in the responsible tech space for about a year now. For the better part of the last year, I've worked with Screen Allies, an organization where we work to provide tools and resources for families who want to know more about their kids' tech use, who want to moderate their kids' screen time, and also just promote a digitally balanced household and community. And relating to the specific talk, I'm really interested in the surveillance capitalism business model, because I think it is a driver of a lot of the unintentional use of tech, and also a lot of other problems that we'll definitely dive into as we get into this talk. So really excited to be here.
Awesome. Great to have you. Abiram, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Abiram. I'm a senior at High Technology High School in New Jersey. I guess I first got into ethical technology when I read an article about algorithmic bias. And from then, I've just kind of learned all about the issues with tech. And this kind of led me to start my own organization called Lucid Tech to help bring awareness to different ethical issues. And I've also been a volunteer at Lookup Live as part of their Team Leadership Council.
All right, I'll introduce myself last. I'm Josh Gottesman. I'm Akul's co-founder at Privy. Mainly got into this space about a year and a half ago when Akul and I were working at Google together. And at that time, COVID misinformation and misinformation around the 2020 elections were really out of control. And we were thinking more and more about that and what the underlying issues of that misinformation were. And we realized it's all about the surveillance business model that major platforms employ today. So that was the impetus and why we ended up starting Privy today.
Awesome. So with intros done, I guess we can dive right in. So as everyone mentioned, we've all identified issues we've seen with the tech kind of ecosystem today. So to start off, we've obviously previously discussed is like tech business models today are typically not human-centric, especially when it comes to a lot of big tech, and generally rely on quote unquote exploiting their users. So what are some of the moral or societal implications you see of this current non-human centric surveillance capitalism model? John, we can start with you. You mentioned there's many problems today, so you can kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think, there is a lot of problems. Two of the big ones that I can identify are, I think, free will is being diminished, at least to a degree. You look at these, the model, and it's driven by algorithms, and these algorithms not only, track your behavior and predict your future behavior, but they also manipulate your future behavior. So on these feeds, you see, this content, and you have a choice of whether to pick from, but really all those choices were really made for you to push you and to kind of funnel you into, more engagement, more use, and more clicks on advertising sites. So that's a big one. And another, I think economic dignity of a lot of people is being undermined with the model, because, the backbone of the model is, behavioral data. And that's treated as an asset for these companies to collect through kind of shady maneuvers sometimes. So I think, that is something that should belong to the people, and not really should belong to the companies, at least in the end. So those are two big problems that I see right now.
For sure. Abiram, anything you want to add to that, or Matt?
I think also it just like kind of like the economic incentives that are being created today. Before it is like, okay, I have a product or a service and I'm selling that to you. But now it's like, okay, how can I gather more of your data? How can I infringe on that right to privacy? How can I find different ways to collect different data and analyze that differently? That's the incentive for like companies, especially tech companies today, is to like John said, to kind of gather as much data as possible and then sell that however they find profitable. So it's like kind of changing the economic landscape and changing how companies think about profit, which is very important because it directly influences us as people.
Mm-hmm. And Aviram, to that point, it's pretty interesting the way that these platforms are essentially reaping all the economic rewards, right? Whereas you could in the future imagine a model where, sure, a platform can serve you ads, but you are actually monetizing off the data that they're using and collecting from you. Or maybe you could have the choice to not see those ads and just pay the service as you would going forward. So I think it's really interesting that almost every internet platform has chosen let's just give it away for free. People won't realize, and then we can exploit them going forward. Obviously, they don't have when these platforms were created, people weren't saying, okay, how can we exploit humans for our own gain? It was more so, how do we create network effects? But to John's point earlier, the unintended consequence is now that you can be manipulated through these platforms, and that's harmful for society.
Absolutely, Josh. And to kind of give you guys some more insight on some studies as well that I've kind of read through during my research paper, actually, during my time at UC Berkeley. A study conducted by Stanford and Cambridge University actually found that Facebook algorithms are actually better judges of personalities than friends and families now. It's gotten to a point where these advertisement models are kind of requiring these companies to get a better understanding of you as a user, to then be able to cater advertisements that are for your needs as well, and to get you hooked onto their device. But that also leads to a lot of misinformation. And that's simply because a lot of times people like to hear certain things. And this leads to not only echo chambers, but it also leads to this kind of situation where more stimulating information is being brought up. So for example, we've seen this, as we mentioned a little earlier before, was the 2020 election. More than ever, there was information just being brought up in regards to just politically charged information. And this not only leads to misinformation, but it also is leading people to kind of just like live in their own worlds rather than being able to see things outside of their own perspectives. And because of that, in 2019 study found, published by an MIT Sloan professors, the falsehoods are 70% more likely to be retweeted on Twitter than the truth. And that's simply because of people living in their own echo chambers and just misinformation being driven so far out in our world.
Really, really insightful, Matt. And it's kind of scary. Some of those points you brought about how powerful these algorithms really are. And I think, Josh, you made it. I really like the point you made about how at first, the goal wasn't to be exploitative to get to this, but after seeing how it worked, that kind of the business model kind of trickled over from just Google to now you see this kind of surveillance model in every industry that does business online. So now it's like from there, it's so embedded in how we use and how we interact with these digital devices. It's like, where do we go from there? So that, I guess that's the big question.
Yeah, and to John and Matt's point, like Matt, particularly yours, like this idea that the algorithms know what we want to engage with and react to most. I think there's a clear issue where people conflate engagement with what people want. What you are most likely to see and react to is certainly not the same as what you want to see. And obviously we are lacking in terms of studies on that type of information, but it would be interesting if researchers could go deeper in that area to say like, okay, what do people actually want to see if you ask them versus like, what is their lowest common denominator emotional reaction, which tends to be, to your point, fear, misinformation, and things that really scare you or excite you.
Yeah, I think these are all great points. I think, John, you mentioning like ads and surveillance has kind of become the pervasive business model across most of the internet at this point. And you can make arguments as to why that might have happened or like how that was built out. And then to Josh's point as well of like definitions can differentiate based on what you're trying to solve for. So I think that really sets the stage for like our kind of next point of discussion of like, that is what the world is today. What is a human-centered kind of technology or business model kind of look like as we go forward? Like, what are some specific attributes that you believe should be part of this new kind of, system or ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, as we kind of shift away from the status quo today? This one, Abhiram, you can kick things off.
Sure. I mean, I think that especially when it comes to technology, we've mentioned that, it's embedded into many different aspects of our life, even subconsciously, right? So I think when developers are like kind of making this technology or just thinking about human-centered business models in general, it's really thinking about the ethical and social implications it could have on society. And it has to be like an active kind of like discussion, right? You got to like really analyze how it's impacting individuals, certain groups of people. And it's taking that time and then that effort to analyze those repercussions that really sets out the difference between just, letting it be, right? Like some companies did that, like Google, for example. They saw that benefit and they just took advantage of it. So you have to kind of find those shortcomings and address them.
Yeah, to that note, it is so, like you said, it is so embedded. So I think when looking at a human-centered business model or trying to establish that, we kind of got to get creative and kind of have a little imagination. And I think in doing that, we can kind of take from certain attributes that certain models have today, even though they may have their flaws. But look at attributes that we like about some products and some that we don't, and then kind of from there, work from there. So I think, some attributes, as we talked about, of a human-centered business model that we can look at moving forward, maybe something like not a business model that just doesn't exploit human and behavioral weaknesses. Another one, maybe compensate users fairly for their data, treat users as a customer rather than a product. At Privy, I know you guys have a great perspective on that, and one that's maybe economically and ecologically sustainable.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, John, to put some more like breadth to that, we could talk about specific companies that have human-centered business models today in terms of where they stand on the spectrum. I think Netflix would be one example, right? So a company where all the users are actively aware that they are the actual customers of the product and they pay directly for that service, right? So typically, if the money is coming from another source, you are the product, and you are being exploited as a result. Whereas for Netflix, exactly, or let's say Apple Music, that you are paying for that product and you are getting a service in return. And that is more of a human-centered design.
Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Just taking it all in, and like, I think a lot of the common thing that we're seeing within human-centered technology and business models is this sense of transparency with the company themselves and their customers. And correct, looking at the users not as products, but instead as being individuals that they want to serve. Because I mean, as we've been iterating over and over again, it's these social media platforms weren't constructed to exploit us. That wasn't the initial goal. It was to connect us as individuals and as humans. And so moving forward, this human-centered technology requires companies to just clarify certain things, work on that threshold between what customers or users are comfortable with sharing. So for example, I think we're all very comfortable with sharing our genders, our date of birth, our names, our general location. Those tend to be things that we're comfortable with sharing. And those are, could be a part of the human-centered technology. It's now when we start getting into the grittier things where it's like, oh, like how much time do you spend on certain types of images or certain, what are you Google searching? Those are times where we start to kind of question like, oh, wait, I did not know that was happening in the background.
Got it. That's a great point, right? Like there's certain subsets of information you're willing to share. Now, I think in that same vein are you willing to share it in general, or if you are getting something in return for sharing it? Like, how do you think of that concept? And we can start with you, Matt, since you're the one who mentioned that concept of willingness to share certain pieces of information.
Of course, yeah. I think everyone is willing to share certain things. So for example, like let's go back to our Netflix example. I know, for example, with Netflix, they provide different services for different countries. So you can set a location for yourself to then be able to have catered Netflix. My mom is personally from Korea, and so Netflix for her is better when it's catered towards the Korean shows she likes watching, for example, like the ever so popular Squid Game that just popped up. But more though, this is again, I think what you said, Akul, is exactly right. It's the fact that we are getting a service in return for providing this information, but this information we're willing to share for that service is acceptable for us personally, or at least I can speak for myself. I think in general, people are welcoming to that. Everyone has their own different thresholds, of course. I would like to hear, of course, everyone else's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. There's a lot of like, I'm really comfortable with sharing that type of information, like my location, maybe my age, because I know, I don't want to watch something that really, that maybe the algorithms know I wouldn't like. I think the problem arises too when they kind of collect information on things that we maybe may not feel comfortable sharing, such as something behaviorally that we may be doing online, and in a way that's collected that we don't really know what's happening. And I think that part of it, the data that we don't know is being collected, and that we don't know is being served to third-party advertisers. That's like the backbone, I think, of the problem.
Yeah, definitely. I guess, John, curious on that, to add on to your points, what are some examples that you think of, for example, for like things that may be feeling like encroaching?
Yeah, so I know on Netflix, I'm not really sure how they would do that, but I know there's a plethora of examples of collecting data in the background that you may not be aware of. I know a story just came out about how an insurance company was working with a medical provider, and they were gathering data without the patient's notice, and that data was being used to actually upcharge insurance. So that's a specific example, but I think there's a lot of examples that can be shown on Twitter, LinkedIn, all social media companies also, of that kind of collecting data in the background. So yeah, it definitely is it's definitely discouraging, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed. Yeah.
To that point, I think, well, obviously collecting data without you knowing is definitely wrong on a moral level, but also I think we're willing to give up like more data or certain types of data based on what we're getting back. I mean, social media is designed to be addictive, right? So you of course like it for those reasons, like it's catered to you. So because of that, even if you knew that Facebook or whatever was collecting this data, like engagement, behavioral data, you might be willing to give it up because you're getting social media in return. And to your insurance example, I'm not sure where they're getting the data from, but it could be like from like smart devices like Fitbit and stuff like that. And so you can take that example and be like, I'm taking this data and I'm providing it to doctors, and they could potentially save your life because of the data they're collecting now. So there's of course like some benefits, but it's also more about what I'm now leveraging, or I'm using my data to get stuff in return. So it's like, instead of money as my currency, it's like data, and I'm willing to give up different types of it in order to get better service.
That's a great point. And I think like Abhiram, what you just mentioned, I think Matt, you touched upon it, of like there's different thresholds, right, of what you're willing to give up in different kind of situations. So I think that kind of begs the question, like what's the threshold where something is human-centric and non-exploitative, and where does it become an exploitative kind of endeavor? And I know one of you also mentioned like something being addictive, like is something addictive necessarily exploiting you, or is that a good thing, bad thing? I think this time, Abhiram, you can kick things off on this one.
Yeah, sure. I think when you talk about social media, I think some of that addictiveness is manufactured. Like of course, they're collecting your data to show you certain things, and that's you like that. It creates polarization, echo chambers, because it's what you like to see. So that addictiveness is kind of manufactured, and so in that sense, it becomes exploitative because you're using this data and they're benefiting off of it directly. Whereas the Netflix example is, you find value intrinsically from what you're seeing, right? Like, of course, what you see is partially determined by what you've watched previously, the data that Netflix collects. But you're watching because the TV show is good. You're watching because the movie is good. So it's not Netflix that's controlling that. And I think that's where the threshold is.
And to that point, Iriam, I think the difference is that Netflix specifically just wants you to enjoy the TV shows, right? Whereas if you really think about what's happening on Facebook, it's not that they really want you to enjoy and connect with your friends and family. They just want you to stay on longer so they can serve more ads and make more money, right? Unfortunately, because that is the business model, that ends up being the underlying incentive, right? However, if we asked Facebook employees, I guarantee they wouldn't say, oh, our only goal is to get you to stay on as long as possible to make money off of you. But like, unfortunately, the key activities that they're undertaking do indicate that that is indeed the goal, which makes it exploitative.
To kind of talk about the concept of like the threshold, I think a great example would be other products. So for example, let's take Juul, for example. Juul is known to be an addictive product, especially among teens, and it's been very well recognized to be a detriment to people's health. But the thing is, the difference between something like Juul versus something like social media, which we've seen constantly over and over again, especially with more and more studies coming out, that it is a detriment to teen mental health and people's like perspectives, is the fact that it's kind of being masked behind this concept like, oh, we're here to connect you and make you feel good about yourself, versus like Juul, where it's very clear like, hey, this is a product that is not good for you. They have a bunch of warning labels through the FDA, which they require. It's very clear like, hey, this is a choice that you are making, taking and utilizing our product. So in regards to how we can provide a threshold and provide that is through like that kind of information, where these companies, whether it's like at the start of like when utilizing the product, when clicking on Facebook, maybe a quick pop-up ad, or not pop-up ad, but like a pop-up information where it's like, hey, just a warning for you, this is going to be like exploiting you in some kinds of ways. It's addictive. And like just providing that overall transparency, I think, is extremely important to providing that kind of threshold between human-centric and then non-exploitative.
I love that point, Matt. It's like when I guess it's like you said, it's only exploitative when, you don't know, when the user doesn't know the consequences, and when the manufacturer makes it known of the consequences and the user voluntarily, agrees to that, then, you can't, it's hard to say that that's exploitative. Going back to like the Netflix example, and then back to like social media too. With Netflix, it's more, it's easier to know that the consequences of the data. I'm getting this data gathered about me because I want to watch these good shows. But then on social media, it's almost like there's like another layer, and it's harder for users to know what's actually happening. I know a big question that I've heard a lot of some of my friends, especially my younger friends, like they just, a lot of them use some of these platforms and don't actually know how these platforms make money. It's like it's like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, like they don't let it be known at all, or it is known maybe through that private policy that's like 25 pages or whatever that nobody reads. It's like they don't make it known that the advertising is really what brings it the money. So I think when people, like you guys kind of mentioned, when people know those consequences and are able to react off those consequences, then okay, we can have a fair discussion.
Yeah, and John, to that point, like we can use data to back that up, right? So in Q4 of 2020, Facebook made on average about 18 to 19 bucks a month per user in North America, right? And that's on average. So if you think through it from like a heavy user, these typically follow power distributions. That means a heavy user could be worth $40 to $50 a month on average to Facebook. And again, you're not getting anything from that data. So they could do it in a more transparent way where they just say, hey, X% of the value that we're getting from advertising or X% of the value we get from your data is returned to the users. And people would be much more accepting of that transparent trade-off versus just doing it, they accrue all the value. And you'd feel good yourself if you're getting paid for your social media experience.
I think those are all great points. I think that kind of actually works great as a transition into the Q&A. So the audience has a couple of questions. I'll kind of pitch them to you guys one by one. So obviously we've discussed kind of a couple of different aspects of what human-centric can look like, right? Like transparency, kind of control, et cetera. So I guess the first question we can start off with is, what are some of the key kind of pieces or notes of a human-centered business model? I know we've kind of discussed this in general, but I guess in this case, let's just summarize. Like if you had to describe it in one sentence or like 3 or 4 adjectives, like how would you kind of put that together? We can start with John on this one.
Yeah, that's obviously an important question. And I know we keep going back to that word exploited, like exploit and exploitative. And I think a human-centered business model is one that doesn't exploit customers or users weaknesses as humans, that be cognitive weaknesses or behavioral weaknesses. So, not being able to get off social media and skipping policies or not skipping autoplay. Like I think when companies know about these weaknesses and of course exploit those weaknesses, then it's not human-centered. But as we talked about, when those consequences are known, then we can have a better, they have a better argument for it. But I guess one that is just that is non-exploitative, if I had to sum it in one sentence, but of course that has a lot of other branches about, how can we go about doing that?
For sure. There's always a lot of nuance, right, that you have to capture. It's tough to do in one sentence. Abiram, Matt, anything you guys want to add to that, or Josh?
I think, John, you said it pretty well, very clearly. But I think, overall, obviously it's not exploitative, but it's just like aligning with public values, like what we consider to be morally right, making sure that, you're not making any unethical decisions and unethical practices, which of course is very broad, but I mean, if that's something people could keep in mind when making this, it'd be very helpful.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I would define it in one sentence as a business is not exploitative when it's actually providing customers a product. Customers are fully understanding of what that product is and how the company is making money.
Well said. So yeah, I think in the same way, we actually have a follow-up question. Like, what are some examples of companies who use more ethical business models? Whoever wants to take this, the floor is yours.
One big one I can think of is Kickstarter. So, with Kickstarter, people, create these products, create these inventions, and they put it on Kickstarter. It's kind of a social media type platform. And then investors come and, they're matched with, what they're looking for on both sides, what the investors are looking for and maybe what the investors are looking for. So I think that's a good example to kind of look at, because on Kickstarter, I'm sure that data is collected, but that data is kind of collected to provide hard, tangible resources in the form of money, making the user or the inventor, more economically sustainable. That's a good example to start with.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think we also discussed some other ones earlier, like Netflix or others that are a little more focused on their users rather than on alternative kind of revenue streams. So I think pivoting back towards social media, we have another great question here is, can we manipulate the algorithms on social media platforms? Meaning, can we linger, engage on content we want the algorithm to feed us in order to influence the algorithm towards we actually want? Again, whoever wants to take a stab at this first, feel free.
I can start there. You can try, but unfortunately, because most social media platforms are tracking everything you do on the internet, including outside of what you're doing on that platform, it's going to be very, very difficult to get exactly what you think you want. So my example would be my Instagram Discover section is entirely steak and athletes, right? Like there's no way I can change that unless I start looking at completely other content for a very long time. So I'm not sure the question is whether what we can do to manipulate those algorithms, but it's more like what can companies do to create algorithms that are better? And they could give users control, right? So like, let's say Abhiram or John or Matt wants to see like more fashion content or sports content. They could tell the company they want to see more of that, and the company could give them that. Like there's no reason that the technology wouldn't allow for that type of control and still provide a good personalized algorithm that is engaging enough to make money.
Yeah, I think what Josh said is exactly right. I guess a solution for the question though is essentially they are constructing these profiles. So like any kind of like, let's say you have had Instagram for 10 years, they have information on you for 10 years. If you are to construct maybe like a new Instagram profile, you'll probably start fresh. So like, for example, for me personally, when I constructed a new email for work, I clicked on some like piano playlist for studying, and that's all I'm being recommended on there right now versus my personal email where it has a lot more on basketball and my New York Knicks and food as well. So very different. If you are looking to kind of try to like shift the algorithm, maybe construct a new account for yourself. That might not be a bad start.
Yeah, to add one more point about the question, I think, you know, like Josh said, you can do that, but man, that's hard to do because, you know, going back to another problem, you know, a lot of the times, you know, and this is backed by research, we linger and we engage with content really for us. And content that triggers emotions. People are more likely to engage with that than content that triggers. So it's like, in those algorithms, that's happening on purpose just because, you know, it's going the goal, it's meeting the goal of engagement. So yeah, that you can do it, but it's hard to do, and because they make it so that it's hard to do.
For sure. I think another follow-up we have in the same vein is, so we know that's how they operate today. What is, or how could we get this message to the companies to change their algorithms? Is there anything you can do to convince the current major players to change how they operate?
So I actually read this article. It mentioned how we can leverage our data to create change. So in the article, it mentioned these things called data strikes and data poisoning, where essentially it's like we're conscientiously not contributing data to the algorithm by not using social media for like a week, or maybe we're just clicking on every single ad that we get. So it's basically useless, right? But we're contributing to the algorithm. And there's one statistic I think it said if 30% of people went on data strikes, it would reduce the accuracy of the algorithm by 50%. So 30%, it's a large number of people, but if you can raise awareness, I guess, and then like get people motivated to make this change, you can physically kind of like turn the tables. I mean, you're instead of them profiting off your data, you're messing them up by contributing no data or useless data.
Yeah, so I think that's a phenomenal concept and super intriguing. I'm just not sure that's not like a sustainable change for a company, right? So let's say we did achieve a data strike for 2 weeks, which would be incredible to get 30% of Facebook users to not, or and Instagram users to not go on for 2 weeks, right? So they would see a drop in revenue for 2 weeks. After those 2 weeks, everyone would go back on and things would start to level and stabilize back to normal. So I think it would be more interesting I think what's happening right now is what's going to push companies for greater transparency, right? All the negative PR. And this isn't, we know it's just for Facebook right now that's getting it, but this extends to TikTok, YouTube, obviously, and Twitter as well. It's just that it's all landing on Facebook, but it's just more control and transparency over what you can do on the platform.
Just to add on to what Josh said, because what Josh said was just very succinct and very correct. If you guys have not checked out the Wall Street Journal, they've been releasing out a series where they kind of go into Facebook's algorithms, and they actually have a conversation with the whistleblower herself. And so, especially right now, I think we're seeing more and more awareness. And as more and more users become more aware about the situation, I think Facebook and these kind of companies will be kind of forced to make some adjustments in terms of how drastic these adjustments are and how they're gonna actually be produced long term. Time will hopefully tell, but also I think we can have a conversation as well about the government as well, as currently, I mean, the government's role is to make sure that the entire society and community is doing well. And so having more government regulations on these companies to ensure good algorithms that are not intended for maluse, those are kind of conversations that could be brought up as well.
I think these are all great ideas. I think both what Matt and Josh mentioned, and also Abiram, the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned that was a Wall Street bets group on Reddit just deciding they're gonna go nuke Instagram's algorithm for a week or something. So those that would be entertaining in and of itself. I think, and so another question we have kind of looking towards the future is regarding the future of AI. So obviously a lot of companies mentioned they use AI, whether it's for content moderation, everything from that to autonomous vehicles to edge computing in the future, whatever it may be. How are we going to manage the power of AI to control algorithms and misinformation? So that is the question here. As we look at kind of the new advents of technology, kind of what's going to dictate how that's reined in and not kind of just let loose on the world like we did with social media the last 10 years.
I think that's very broad. I think that's something that people are still continuously thinking about solutions towards. It's a very broad thing, especially with questions on who's responsible for taking charge of that. Is it really these individual companies that are in charge of constructing good algorithms for society, even though they're a privately owned company? Or is it the government's role, especially with social media and becoming so integral into our society? And so there's definitely debates on both sides, whether it's the company's responsibility or maybe it's a mix of both the government and companies as well. But I guess one solution that I've thought about and just have been reading about recently are just current white papers and current regulations that are being constructed right now, just currently, even right now, in regards to having more regulations on not just fact checking, but just ensuring that these algorithms that companies are constructing are not for maluse, and having those kind of checks and balances between the government and the companies. Of course, in terms of the logistics, it just seems very complex in general, but those are kind of the steps that we could be seeing in the future. Of course, it'd be a long-term process.
Yeah, like Matt said, that is a big question, and it's a very important one. And I think going back to your point, I think if it doesn't happen internally, maybe through pressure on these companies like John mentioned, PR that's coming out, then it might have to happen externally. And in that, as individuals, I think we can support legislation, support politicians who have knowledge about this, like Deval Patrick, who was on yesterday. And also just try to do everything we can to get our voices looking to the future. It's definitely a possibility.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think that flows really well into kind of our last question from the audience of, so Matt, you mentioned people need to get educated of the issues out there. And I think John, you brought up as well, Abiram as well. People don't know how these companies operate, how much money they're making off you. So kind of what advice do you have to people on like how can they advise others that don't know what's going on when they're signing up to use existing platforms? And I think we can also expand that scope of that question to like in general, like what are some steps you think people should take to support and foster human-centered technologies kind of going forward?
To start, I guess I would say, I think summits and conferences like this is definitely for beginners a great place to start. You know, a lot of people here, a lot of great ideas being flowed here, of course, like this panel. And I think it's just, you know, I think you just have to get creative with how you can get educated about this stuff. There definitely the desire has to be there, I think, and I think to do that, it's going to be hard, and it might take, as I mentioned earlier, some external government, you know, initiatives to educate the public. But of course, I think any education at all is positive.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. I would give like one question to the audience as you think through anytime you're using a product that's free and doesn't ask you for your money, think about, okay, how is this company, product, or app making money? Just try to ask yourself that. It's obviously not an easy thing to do every single time you use something, but if you do that, you'll consistently get a better understanding of how these companies are making money and whether or not you are the product and whether it's a human-centered business model.
And just like another thought as well, I made the analogy earlier with Juul and then social media as well. Social media has constantly been compared to as a drug. And I know as kids in elementary school and middle school, there are a lot of drug awareness, like conferences, but also like kind of these required like sessions within the school themselves to provide that kind of educational awareness. And so as social media becomes more and more clear to be a detriment at times to society, having those kind of like potentially having the government implement these kind of required sessions may be something that is feasible and potentially really good for society as well.
For sure. Abhiram, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just one thing. One day I went to ad settings.google.com and just looked at what Google knew about me or what it was collecting or what it thought about me. It was really interesting. I looked at the preferences, you know, some were accurate, some did not make sense at all. But I think just like, you know, I had the initiative to do that. But if you do go there, it's really interesting to see what exactly Google is doing there, because there is a lot of information about, or there is a little bit of transparency in that sense. So I'm sure Facebook and other social media companies have something similar. So I think I would encourage everybody to just like go there like one time, spend like 10 minutes just looking at it. I think it's very eye-opening.
Absolutely. It'll be eye-opening, probably somewhat creepy as well. Well, we're at time for the panel. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. Hope you had a great time. I know I had a great time listening to all four of you guys talk about this in depth. Lots of great comments and interesting points. As a reminder, the content will be available for 6 months on the Summit portal. And next up is a session on #breaking the stereotype with Amanda LeCount, body positivity advocate. I highly encourage you to check that out. And again, thank you everyone for coming to this today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.
Guess we're good. Really enjoyed being on with you guys. I think that was great.
Yeah, it was a lot of great conversation.
It was really good meeting you guys. And I wish you guys all the best in the future, in your future endeavors, really.
Thank you.
Yeah. Best of luck to the college application process, Abhiram. You got this.
Yeah,
Sounds like you're gonna do great.
Thanks.
You guys.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.